koutou. Today we're going to talk a little bit about seed saving. So I've got a beautiful tomato here. This is, I believe it's Karen's Best, or we call it Karen's Best, which is a type of Russian red. And it's a really amazing tomato for us. It's been doing super well this season. So we want to save the seeds. So I'm going to do a bit of an introduction into a method of seed saving that I really like. So this is called the wet process seed saving method. So if you have seeds from something like a pumpkin, you can kind of just pop them out of the pumpkin, give them a little wash and dry them out, and that's fine. If you're saving like calendula or flower seeds, they're quite often just dry in the flour. Shake them out, make sure that they're dry, and then you can store them. But how do you process a seed that is encased in goop? So a tomato, I'll cut this open. I mean, you've all seen tomatoes, so I don't really need to show you this, but I just want to cut a tomato on camera. This is a beautiful, oh my gosh. It's a nice sharp knife, actually. Whoa, yeah. So the seeds are inside, but they're encased in goop. All of this gel, there's this kind of like gel sac around each seed. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of that gel. So we use the wet process, or some people use the wet process method. A lot of kind of commercial seed savers will use this. And essentially the wet process is, at its purest, it's mixing the seeds and some water and letting it ferment for a bit. What happens during the fermentation is that a lot of this kind of goop that surrounds the seeds will break down and the seeds are released. So this is one that I started on the 26th. I don't know what the day is today, 29th. So it's about three days old. They're still kind of floating inside the goop. And they're still floating, so it means it's not quite ready. Here though, you can kind of see that the seeds have all sunk to the bottom and they're not really surrounded by any goop anymore. So it tells me that they're kind of ready to process. So anyway, I'm going to show you how to do this wet process method. But quickly before I do, a couple of advantages. So at its simplest, you could probably just scoop out the seeds from this tomato, put it on a paper towel and let it dry. And then you've got your seeds saved for next year. That's a totally fine way to do it if you're not saving that many seeds. But advantages to the wet process method are that your finished seed are separated. So it's a lot easier to sow. Instead of having one big clump, you've actually got individual seeds that you can control when you sow. The other advantage is that there's no pulp around them, so you don't really have the risk of them going moldy if you get any moisture into your seed collection. And the other major advantage is that the fermentation process tends to kill off any like disease organisms, so pathogenic like bacteria or fungi or things like that. They die in the fermentation process. So ideally, if you do this, the seed that you sow is less likely to pick up those diseases from the last crop. So how do you do it? It's pretty simple, but I'm going to break it down into multiple steps. So you're going to need a tomato that you love and a jar. I use a teaspoon and I just kind of go through and scoop out all the goopy bits of the tomato. If it's a really soft one like a cherry tomato, you could just squeeze the tomato until the juice comes out. But if it's kind of like a firm tomato, sometimes it's quite nice to just scoop out the little goopy bits. I'm going to say goopy bits a lot of times. Scoop out the goopy bits, and then you'll be left with the husk, which you can actually eat, or you could roast and make into a tomato sauce or whatever you want to do. So you scoop out all your bits into a jar. I'm going to do both of these because we want lots of seeds of this tomato. And then the next step basically is that you're going to add a little bit of water. So by adding water, you're creating a semi-anaerobic condition, meaning without oxygen, where this can sort of spontaneously ferment. So all of the microbes that are going to do the work are just kind of omnipresent. They're present on everything. Don't have to worry about adding a starter or anything. And you scoop out all your seeds. It's pretty much all of them. And they're in your jar. And then these, eat them. I tend to do all my seed saving in one big go, so I'll like save seeds from like 5 different types of tomatoes and do several of each. So at the end of it, I've got heaps of these left, and then I can whack them in the oven and roast them with some olive oil and make a soup. Cool. Okay, seeds in a jar. You could leave it like that. This is pretty wet, but I'm going to add a little bit more water. So you just want to add a splash of water to loosen it up. here we are, the water's only just covered the tomatoes. And then that's basically it. Pop a lid on it, don't leave it tight because it will get a bit fermenty and it'll produce gas. And then you want to put a label on it so you know what you've got, because at the end of it, pretty much all tomato seeds look the same, so you need to make sure you label it. Cool. Set this aside for about, 5 days. You'll be able to tell by the signs. So this is a few days in. You can see that the water's gone kind of cloudy. The seeds are still in there, but they haven't really settled to the bottom, so it's not fully ready yet. They're still inside their little gel casings. Ooh, it's producing gas. It's also kind of stinky, so just be warned that this smells a bit rotty. It's not horrible, but it's kind of like tomato beer, which is not really like nice. So anyway, you can give it a little bit of a shake up to see if they're ready. And the seeds are starting to fall down, but they've still got a bit of goop around them, so I would leave that for another couple of days. These ones here, I think are ready. They're all sinking to the bottom, and the liquid on top has sort of separated, so there's nothing really hanging out on the top of the liquid. It's just seeds at the bottom, a layer of their kind of flesh, and some water. So this is going to hiss as well. Ooh, this one smells kind of alcoholic. That's crazy. So give it a bit of a shake up, and you're going to break the seeds apart from their gel casing. The fermentation has loosened them up. It might have broken them down completely, but the shaking does the final trick. And then I'll turn that around. And you hold it still, and the seeds will sort of begin to fall to the bottom. They're mostly doing that. Yeah, we've got a layer of seeds hanging out at the bottom. And then you're just going to do a couple of washes of this. So there are a few seeds in this, but mostly the seeds that float at this point are not viable seeds. The heavy ones, or the ones that sink, are the viable seeds that you want. And they sink because the seeds are the densest part of this, so they're heavier and they go to the bottom. So pour off as much of this liquid. If there's pulp in there, it'll come off too. And then you'll be left with seeds at the bottom. And then we're going to wash it a couple of times. So top your jar up with some more water. Screw your lid on. Shake it like a cocktail. Now I'm thinking about Bloody Marys, actually. And I might make one when I get home. Cool. And then we'll just let that settle. Sometimes it takes a little while for the seeds to fall. They're just remembering what they need to do. Yep. The water's still pretty cloudy, so I'm going to do a couple more washes. Another top up of water. Don't worry about the water. It can be tap water, it can be spring water, I don't know, leftover water from your jug that's not hot. You're just trying to wash them. You're not fermenting, so it doesn't have to be super nice distilled water. You're just washing. Yeah, this is probably good for the final shake. And the seeds are really satisfyingly just chilling out on the bottom of the jar while all the kind of pulpy bits have gone to the top. So I'm going to pour off that final lot of pulpy stuff. There will be a few seeds that come out. Don't stress about that. Yeah, nice. And then you want to strain them. I don't have a sieve with me, that's what I use at home, but we've got a little mesh bag, so I'm just going to pour the seeds onto the mesh bag. And you've got your seeds. And then, I think in my experience, the best thing to put this on is to baking paper. You just want something that they're not going to stick to. A plate is fine, but they might kind of stick to it a little bit as they dry. There we are. These are actually still quite goopy, so to be honest, if I was doing this at home, I'd probably give them another few days, but just for the sake of the video, I'll show you what we do. You can kind of see that little gel sac around them, which tells me that they haven't fully fermented, but that's okay. I'll probably put them back in and give them a few days. Anyway, once they're cleaned and they're out on your paper, you'll have them spread out. Just leave them somewhere, not in direct sunlight, but just somewhere in your house to dry for a few days. As they dry, you'll have these like little clumps of seeds, and you can just come along with your fingers and separate them apart. It's helpful to do that nice and early on as they're drying. When they get a bit too dry, they might stick together, but you rub them apart and they separate out. And then leave these out at room temp to dry out fully for about a week. After that point, you can pretty safely assume that there's not much moisture left in them and you can store them. I tend to store mine in like a little plastic bag. You could store them in a jar. The reason I do that is because it's relatively airtight. So if you think about a seed, there are a few major things that a seed needs to grow. It needs warmth, it needs moisture, and it needs oxygen. So if you have it in an airtight little bag or a jar or something like that, it's not getting any moisture because you've dried it out, it's not getting any fresh oxygen, and you want to store it somewhere with relatively stable temperature. Like this, these seeds will keep for about 5 to 7 years, which is quite a bit longer than they would if you just had them on a paper towel. The other advantage that I didn't mention is that this jelly goop that surrounds the tomato seed contains a germination inhibitor, which basically just means it's a hormone that stops the seeds from sprouting. So if you think about it, like a tomato sitting on the plant has got warmth, it's got oxygen, and it's got moisture, but they don't sprout in the fruit. So actually what happens in nature is when the tomato falls and it rots, that fermentation process is what breaks down that germination inhibitor and helps the seed grow. So the other advantage is that once you've broken down that gel sac, these don't have a germination inhibitor and they will grow a lot quicker when you sow them next year. So this is just like a rough guide to the wet fermentation process, but super useful for tomatoes. I do it every year. And it's a great way to kind of find tomatoes that you love and just keep growing them. I've got a collection of about 20 different types at home. We've got quite a few here at Dignan Street as well. Yeah, and this way you get really healthy seeds that you can save, you can give away, you can keep for a few years. Yeah, and they'll last. So yeah, happy growing. Hope this helps.